All right, welcome. So, if you haven't realized by now, this is CBOQ Youth's 20th year in ministry. And today I am glad to have a few friends with me. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more thoroughly in just a moment. But if you've noticed, we've got three guys. We've got Darren DeGraaf, who was our director Director of Youth Ministries back in, what was it, 2000 to 2006. And then Tim McCoy, who was Director of Youth Ministries from 2006 to 2010. And then Matt Wilkinson, who took over in 2011 to the present. So gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
If you want to give me a quick introduction of, obviously I just noted when you served on CBOQ Youth, but even just a little bit about your history now, what you've been up to, and just a short little snapshot for friends to know about.
Yeah, I'll jump in first and let the other guys go behind so we follow in sequence. When I stepped out of CBOQ Youth, I stepped into leadership development with the CBOQ, which were a fantastic couple of years before I moved on to join an organization called Arrow Leadership, where I know lots of CBOQ youth have been leaders and pastors have been influenced over the years. I went from Arrow to serve in a local church and loved my time as an executive pastor in a local church. And during that time moved to Edmonton, Alberta, where we currently live as a family. And in the last 14 or 15 months, I've been on a team of a mission organization called Partners International. And I work remotely from home. And we work to resource and support Indigenous leaders who are doing incredible things all around the world.
And I'm Tim McCoy, and I have loved maintaining contact both with Darren, my predecessor, and with Matt, my successor in CBOQ Youth. And man, I feel like I'm bookended by two of the greatest leaders in Canada as it relates to church and as it relates to the mission of God. And I'm so thankful for the support that I felt from Darren and sort of the brilliance of Matt's focus on caring for churches and leaders beyond my time. And since 2010, when I stepped away, I've been serving in the executive minister role at CBOQ and still enjoy sort of the benefit and blessing of seeing next generation be a priority. I'm really thankful and really proud of all the work that had been done, dating all the way back to the days of Bruce Neal with Baptist Young People's Union way back in the day, all the way through to Darren's incredible shifts for us in leadership development of youth ministry, and then seeing the brilliant things that Matt has been able to do, focusing people for sure on relationships with Christ. So yeah, it's joy to be part of this community and great to see Darren and Matt together today with you, Alvin.
Thank you for that, Tim. It's a privilege to be able to carry on what you guys just have set the bar at a high level of passion for seeing the next generation move closer to Jesus, equipping our churches and our leaders across CBOQ to effectively engage the next generation, and just see the elements that have been so instrumental in being anchor points through your years to be able to carry those on and be able to build upon such an incredible foundation. It's great thinking back to the time of when it was all getting started in 2000, making that shift to formalizing it when I was serving as coming shortly around there, around a youth pastor at Spring Garden Church. So having the chance to come back and really kind of get my start in youth ministry in a CBOQ church family, and spending some time there on frontline stuff and just understanding what happens there and the support from CBOQ. And over the years, being involved in different venues and means of youth ministry, and then really considering it a privilege. I remember in 2011, through a lot of journaling and time, that there was the one place was having a piece of what the Lord was stepping into this role, and coming into this role and seeing the excitement of where we're at, of being able to see the next gen team be developed in this, the values that were being put in place of how to engage kids and their families, the importance of camp ministry, and to be able to see that CBOQ Youth really set the foundation that gave credibility really across CBOQ to the value of ministry to next gen, that then opened the door to our ability to now prioritize and give emphasis to kids and family, as well as to the importance of the camping world. And so it's been fun to sit in this seat. And, as we sit around this gathering right here, I think of those 20 years and go, the consistent marker through this all has been Alvin. And to have such a consistency, it really gives that bench strength to what we do over the years and allows a number us here to thrive in the roles that we have in the director roles. But it's because of those that are making it possible, and so grateful for the way that Alvin has really kind of set this stage and continues to keep the emphasis on our youth workers, and really understands our history with the lens to how do we continue to move forward. So it's definitely a privilege to join with you guys as we celebrate what a milestone of 20 years.
Well said, Matt.
All right, so now that I got my video clip, we can finish now. No, I'm just kidding. So what we're going to do is
shout out to Alvin. It's all about you, man. It's all about you.
He knows.
So we're gonna walk through some of these different eras and kind of, obviously each of you had different vantage points through these different segments. But let's just go right back to the beginning. So Darren, as I remember, you were brought on staff on April 1st of 2000.
Yeah, what a joke.
It was not a joke. It was real. And so when you first stepped into this whole thing, because you didn't necessarily come from a CBOQ background, what was youth ministry in the Baptist landscape like in the first place when you arrived?
Great question. And I really stepped in, and as I think about it, at the time I was so much younger than I am now. 20 years have passed, obviously. And I remember coming in and very quickly discovering a very passionate core of volunteers. And so as I think back over those years, I can think of people that are still around, right? So Tanya Young, she's gotten married since those 20 years ago, but she was on that volunteer team. It was being led by a man named Dan Malcolm, who was youth pastor at York Minster Park at the time. And there were some already amazing volunteer leaders who were giving of their time and their energy. They had built some pretty neat events that I think we were able to build on. So I think they still continue today. So the Raptors event was already in place and was already doing some fantastic things, providing opportunities for young people to come together and be in that very vibrant experience. So yeah, I came into, I think, a place that was maybe a little more traditional, right? There had been a lot of focus on local camps, that some of which were really struggling. And then a few events that were able to be put together by a number of volunteers. And we were able to build on that platform. But it was I think one of the things that we very quickly discovered is that we were able to draw together a cluster of youth leaders and youth specialists who were primarily passionate about helping young people meet Jesus. And that became the founding and the benchmark truth upon which I think CBOQ Youth continues to be grounded, which is helping young people to meet Jesus, grow in Jesus, fall in love with Jesus, and be discipled in their walk with Christ. And it was a thrill to walk with young people as they made that decision, and to watch youth pastors, both volunteers and paid, grow and develop in their maturity as well.
So wondering, like, what, in those first year or two, what were things that you felt picked up pretty quickly, and what were some things that maybe took a little bit longer to get going?
Sure. Yeah. Well, in the first year or two, there was really the pre-Alvin era, right? And the post-Alvin era. And so pre-Alvin, really nothing happened, right? So lots of big ideas, but no implementation, of course. All kinds of creativity, but nothing got centered. Now that's, Alvin, you very quickly came onto the picture, of course. And I think when we started with some big events. And back then, I think I probably would have been known as the event guy, and that certainly changed in my life over the last 20 years. But we built some big events that were really important. And as I was thinking about preparing for this interview today, I was thinking about Jacob when he wrestles with God and he builds he builds at Bethel there just a memorial to that moment, and how important events are in our lives. We're all talking right now about how COVID-19 is going to define us, and this generation will be known for how we've walked through these days, right? And so I think there are these times and places that become really important. For me, the events quickly grew to become very effective places for people to experience Jesus, to meet Jesus. I know I'm kind of fast forwarding here, Alvin. One of the questions you wanted me to consider was what some of the legacy of those years, and really the legacy of those years was young people meeting Jesus and saying yes to Jesus. I'd say a surprise for me, and something that was something that concerned us, was also how many youth leaders we led to Jesus in that season as well through some of those events, and who we had the opportunity to mature and disciple. And so, Alvin, you'll know very early on, our passion was to say, we want to bring reconciliation between God and man in the church. And we want to see the church be redeemed. And I think that that's been a constant trend as well through BCOQ Youth. And we've been able to see some important renewal in churches as people have focused on Christ again. So the events, I think, took off quite quickly. Very quickly, we of course wrestled with the fact that you can't be event-based only. That's not gonna drive something forward long term. We're gonna need to be investing in the leadership development of youth pastors and youth volunteers. So we found, I think, some good ways to do that. Steve Brown, of course, came and joined the team, and he started to focus on discipleship and thinking about how do you disciple young people for the long haul. We had this little maxim, what does it look like for a 25-year-old to love Jesus? Because what we said is, it's not enough to say what does it look like for an 18-year-old to love Jesus, but we got to get them through those young adult years as well. And so that became something that I think was really important for us. And then, of course, we began to discover how valuable short-term mission could be in opening up the world to young people. And so those became other critical moments and junctures in time when young people, and again, leaders' lives were deeply impacted.
Yeah, it's interesting how, as you were referencing, some of our short-term or compassion experiences we've been doing. I think of people like Dave Stewart, who's I think gone now on 10 of them.
Yeah.
Right. With almost like 3 generations of teenagers. And so, yeah, definitely there's been a lot of, it's been interesting to see how those kinds of moments have impacted trajectory of places like a Harmony Road and where they're going.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Dave Stewart, right? I mean, how many blizzards and avalanches has he been at? Probably almost as many as you, Alvin. So, yeah. Do you get something special, Alvin, when you hit your 50th event? Like, you get like a sabbatical, or what's Tim going to provide for you? Like,
we call it a golden walker.
A golden walker.
By then it'll be a hover. It'll just let me hover all over the place. So
well, I'm going to add in there, when I think about that time, Darren, when you were in leadership there and being one of those leaders that you're invested into, the seat at that point when I was serving as the youth pastor at Spring Garden, being under that with what was happening with events. I mean, that was something, you're carrying on the Raptors one, but I remember that being a high value touch point of how do we continue to do this kind of pre-evangelism or this beginning stage of like, let's not lose sight of the importance of seeing youth move closer to Jesus, that was a real clear priority, and being like, but let's think outside the box. What are the creative ways in building a partnership early on? I mean, the Raptors were just getting going here. And, it's not like now we're sitting with the championship team, which having that partnership is unbelievable. And thank you for making sure that happens. That's been a joy to be part of it from this seat now. But getting that and what brought a community of people together, that was, we keep our eyes on a priority of helping kids, youth move closer to Jesus, and then but being resourced as a youth worker, looking up to people like yourself, being able to be introduced to like a Kurt Erb, and such as say, here's some veteran kind of youth people. Like you're entering in going, hey, I'm brand new to this field of youth stuff, and going, hey, there's a family that wants to be for you, to resource you, to support you. Was one of those things that I go, man, this is great to be part of a youth ministry family with a real intentional effort. I think that was one of the great things of the 2000 moving forward is the intentional effort of both the value of the volunteer leadership, which is so key, but then for CBOQ or BCOQ, the time to say, hey, we want to prioritize ministry to our youth, and let's get some operational dollars behind this so that we can really pour that training time in, and so that youth workers can be developed as leaders to be able to better support their youth and on the front lines. And I definitely then experienced that in my time while serving at Spring Garden.
And I think at that point, you really have to make a shout out to Ken Bellows, right? And his vision with Nancy Bell and others on the leadership to invest in this new thing called CBOQ Youth, or back then BCOQ Youth, and to put resources behind it, staffing. We had a pretty significant staff for the size of denomination that we are, and we're able to do some really neat things because of their foresight. And then, of course, yeah, you mentioned Kurt Erb. Really, when I think about some of the amazing resources that are out there, what I knew about BCOQ Youth back then was through my relationship with Dr. Dave Overhaul, and he continues to remain to be one of my best friends today. And the resources that have been available to the Baptist youth world across Canada, Don Simmons back in the day, and his investment across Canada has just been unbelievable. And really, we do stand on the shoulders of some greats who have come before us.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we have to look at. I mean, that's the value in which we're carrying on right now of the investment. How do we continue that leadership pipeline of young people early on? And you bring up Don Simmons, and he's instrumental in my life at 15 years old, opening up doors for me. At 16, taking me through leadership training in a small group of young leaders, saying, "Hey, we see something in you." He obviously did amazing work with his RV across the country on behalf of Canadian Baptist youth, but giving these leaders along the way that have allowed us to do that, and putting up with young leaders. That's what, Darren, you put up with me, and you're coming into this field in youth ministry, and it's helpful when you're young and trying to figure this all out and trying to make an impact, but also you're young and cocky or dumb or think that you're invincible and you can pull off everything, and having the wisdom of people to say, "Hey, I'm for you. I'm going to come alongside you, and I also got to coach you because I want to see you thrive in the long run." I think that's been a big difference along the way of what it means when CBOQ prioritizes as is holding on. We want to invest well into leaders. We want to develop kingdom leaders that are going to lead healthy churches to see amazing kingdom impact in their communities. And then as a subset from that, what you've kind of modeled getting us going is let's invest into leaders while we impact the local community that way.
And so it's interesting, as we had that initial kind of kickstart in the early 2000s. And then, Tim, I mean, at this point in time, if I remember correctly, you're still in North Carolina.
Right.
You're in a local church. And so what kind of impressions, I mean, given that, if I remember correctly, you didn't really have any history with CBOQ necessarily. So what kind of impressions that you were getting as you were starting to look into this whole area?
Yeah, I had a window period, Alvin, back in 2005 from kind of October until my first sort of introduction to CBOQ Youth was, I think, a SUV ride with Phil Can and Darren DeGraaf up to Avalanche for an interview to meet you and Luther Iglesias that was on the team at the time in youth mission and education. And so I had a bit of a window to sort of do some homework and research. And I think some of the things that I found out then, and even after I arrived here, was that there was a strong infrastructure. I'll link that to a surprise in a minute. But this infrastructure of leadership and volunteer leadership that almost felt like that you had this multiplied staff. The leaders that were volunteers were so committed to this movement. Darren, you and Paul Carter and some of those other guys that sort of built the framework of this in the beginning. It was amazing to see Alvin, you and Luth sort of leverage these volunteers that felt like they were paid staff as hard as they were working and as late as they would stay up and as cold as it was outside. My word, I couldn't believe that they were outside as long as they were at these events. But that was sort of a picture and an image, an exhibit of the infrastructure that I felt like was there. And obviously great leadership that Darren had provided. And I think what I also learned as I came in, that there had been, when all of the abbeys existed throughout CBOQ, WABY, the Western Association of Baptist Youth, there was a real focus on being locally led and locally supported. And that was powerful. There were some significant things happening in our associational regions where youth ministry was alive in a good number of our churches. But I think there was this shift that moved from sort of locally led and locally supported to being corporately led, sort of from a CBOQ perspective, but still empowering local leaders to feel like that they were just as significant as the sort of corporate leadership that was doing that from the CBOQ. I think the other thing that, I continue to preach anywhere I go where I get a chance to speak to youth leaders. And for those of you sitting in the room listening to this today, I think about sort of the hammering of the concept that Darren had given to Alvin and Luth, and what I kept getting reminded of every single time we were together, especially about the events that CBOQ Youth were sponsoring, was that we didn't do church as CBOQ Youth, but we provided a place, and we provided resources for the youth leaders, volunteer and paid, some of them the senior pastors of some of our smaller churches, that our goal was for them to arrive and leave as the pastors and priests of these kids. And Darren, I know that that was language that you began to use with Alvin and those guys early on, but I think that sticks, and we can still say that today. This past year up at Blizzard, I still said to that group, listen, our goal is for you to be the pastors and priests. We don't know what it's like to do youth ministry at Bilberry Creek or in Armprior or in Dryden, and you do. And so we're going to rely on you to be pastors and priests there. So, I think as I showed up, Alvin, I learned that about this, and it was powerful, something very different than I had experienced down in North Carolina. I think as a surprise for me, I have a couple, if I can share more than one. I was surprised and thankful that there had been whatever cost paid to get the leadership of a youth ministry for a denomination at the executive table. If CBOQ had a cabinet, Darren was on the cabinet. I became a member of the cabinet. Matt is on that cabinet table, and around that table, it is as significant as any other team that is resourced from the CBOQ. And I think that's an incredible testament and statement that we're making in Canada, and even in some denominations in the US, that we're saying it is so important. We're going to make it a strategic priority. We're going to give it one of the biggest teams on staff. Darren, you referenced that. And we're going to say this person sits at the second highest level of leadership in the organization. And I think that was a surprise to me that no one else had that, and that we had it here at CBOQ, and I was thankful. I was surprised. I love how we think alike, Darren and Matt and Alvin, but I was surprised at the people who are champions of CBOQ when I showed up. And I think of the Simmons, I think of the Maxim family, and the Cullens, who had a long experience at wanting to champion youth ministry growth. And I know that probably there are 24 other family names that I'm missing in saying this, but I believe that there are people who even still today are so committed and passionate about this next generation and this critical window that we have to introduce kids to Jesus and young adults to Jesus, that they're willing to invest their own family's foundational resources or their own sort of widow's mite to this kind of movement. And it's powerful. And I was surprised by that and thankful. I'd never been a part of a ministry that had developed champions like Darren and the others had done before. And I know we were riding on the shoulders of many that had gone before that had made this a priority, but it was amazing to me. And then I was shocked that you guys had a logo, man. This whole Sharky thing, like I didn't understand hockey at the time. I'm still trying to figure it out. They took the blue line, sort of the blue tracer off the television, so I still am trying to learn it. But I was really thankful for a brand that I felt like that we could belong to, that was a part of a larger family, but was unique and identified us. And it gave kids and youth leaders something to feel like that they were a part of. And I love that about CBOQ Youth.
Yeah, I love that we have a 90s logo. It's like, and we're holding strong. We are holding true being 20th anniversary. And it looks great. Like
this logo existed before me, man. This was,
I know.
Yeah.
That's a Dan Malcolm move, if I remember correctly, because I was an intern for Dan at York Minster Park. That was my first start in youth ministry. And I remember seeing that logo. I mean, you've got shades and you've got a mohawk. Nothing says, hey, we're going to be around in 2020. And we're around in 2020, let me tell you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're now retro again. There you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Alvin, as Tim was talking, I was thinking about, we shared about event-based, and I think you're probably going to ask us, what's been some of the shifts over the years. But when Tim was talking about, young leaders like Luth Iglesias and Luth and I were just able to meet not that long ago for a cup of coffee. And we were talking about those days when she came in as this educational specialist and helped us to create curriculum. And, that curriculum was well ahead of its time. And to provide curriculum to volunteer youth ministries and paid youth ministries really across Ontario and Quebec. It was only in English, but we were able to provide a resource that was so meaningful and so helpful for churches. And now, of course, click of the internet, and you can find more resources than you might ever have time to research. But back then, those binders, they still are on my shelf here. And for many years after, I'd pull that binder out and I'd give it to people, and I'd say, here's a great example of how to help young people grow in their faith. I mean, I still remember Paul Carter had written a series called 5 Ways Weird, right? And it was this amazing 5-week series on how to be a follower of Jesus appropriately, right? What are the ways in which we should be weird in this culture, and what are ways we shouldn't be weird in this culture? And Paul Carter, of course, found some ways to be weird in ways that have scarred my memory forever. But on the whole, we were able to provide some really great resources that Luth created, that Steve Brown invested in, that Rob McAlpine put his hand to. And I just think about the legacy of our youth ministry and all the volunteers who lent their time to write this curriculum, and how we all grew stronger because of it, with this deep passion to see young people fall in love with Jesus and grow in their relationship with him.
And that curriculum really, we saw the strength of that, and still people go back over 15 years. I mean, we've made the shift now to put a pause on that as we opened up different new bridge docs, and we'll talk about that later, how we can better facilitate people to how to actually implement on stuff. But this curriculum, I remember being invited to be one of the writers by you for one series. Now, I think it's probably all got edited out and probably was made all theologically correct after I submitted it all in. But it's fun it's fun to be at least invited as a guy to do some of the writing as a young punk. But I look back at that, and that was opening. That goes back to your value of developing leaders. Hey, let's give a chance to a young leader, but then go, hey, let's look at this value, because this can have a ripple effect to how do we serve the needs and resource leaders in the whole family of churches that we are. And but I think that what you produced there, and what we saw over is, Tim, as you continue that, what really happened is it spread out, and CBOQ said, how do we be kingdom thinkers? And it was really a blessing to much larger than a CBOQ family, that people began to be able to access that, and we made it available online, so that there is countless amount of churches that go back now decades on to these resources and go, hey, this is stuff that we can access, and we can do that. I think that's the beauty of CBOQ is the diversity that we are, is actually many different denominations can tap into the theological approach that we have to that curriculum and go, no, this can work in our context, and we can work with this. And it's a way to be part of not just a wonderful family of churches, but actually be part of a kingdom win and blessing. And I think you started that off early on, and we continue to carry that on, of how do we love our church as a CBOQ deeply, and how do we continue to be part of building God's family.
I'm curious, Matt, just wanted to trail off of that a little bit more, because as you were mentioning, as other families of churches I've also engaged with our Baptist family. During Tim's time, you were with the Meeting House, and also involved in a broader sphere of youth ministry. What was the impression of what this whole CBOQ thing was like? I mean, what was the word that you were hearing from people outside the Baptist family of what this thing was about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things is strong leadership was coming out of it. Some of the leaders they would go through youth, and not all end up going to senior pastor roles and end up leading organizations. You see some of the vein of Steve Brown or such that would come through and be well invested into. But there were entrepreneurial leaders that were investing to the next gen. And then we can see a number of leaders that have come through that kind of pipeline. But it was, from the seat that I had of today's teens conference, so I'd see the registrations rolling in and the churches involved, and who's looking for ongoing professional development, who's looking to train their youth workers, their leadership teams, their student leaders. I mean, there was a huge percentage that were coming from the Canadian Baptist churches, BCOQ church at the time there, that I'm looking at these registrations going, hey, this is my, home tribe that I grew up in. And so I could really see that there was a value on going, hey, we want to continue to be investing into professional development, that this is a unique privilege to invest into the next gen, but it's constantly changing, and the world's changing, and what it takes in our country to address them. And so it seemed that there was always a value on, let's continue to be effective in how do we engage the next generation. And so from that seat, I'd see there, obviously my time at the meeting house, it was a growing animal, crazy. We were trying to figure out more about how we failed a bajillion times, as we had a lot of freedom to try a whole bunch of ways of how to do youth ministry, and had a lot of freedom to try to figure things out, with a great blessing of going, hey, I don't know if we got it all right, but let's keep having fun as we figure out and how do we move more people closer to Jesus. But one of the things that it came to retreats for the meeting house, I went up on and kind of like scoped out Blizzard and go, these are the people that are leading it best. This is the model of what's having high impact, but is willing to be creative, willing to work with Muskoka Woods and say, how do we have a great relationship? What can this property be to further the mission of what God had given that property for, and what God is using within CBOQ? And so I felt blessed to have a chance to kind of have eyes in on that from a seat of going, hey, I think, as meeting house, what ideas can we take and be effective in retreats? Because the bar was set there. But I know I wasn't the only one doing that. And there's a lot of conversation. And when I came into this seat of Director of Youth Ministry at the time, I mean, that was a question I got from a number of people. Hey, can we come up on one of those retreats just to see how it's going? Like, this is how it's run. Tim Duffield, right away when I first came into this role, said to me, like, hey, Matt, like this is one of these key retreats that our staff come and love to see what your team does. The team of your volunteers is just, they set a bar far beyond what we see, and it influences how we do stuff at the Woods. It's how we, many other churches are looking and denoms are how to do retreats. So that's been, that was the view kind of looking on the outside of, especially as it came to some of these events. Hey, CBOQ is doing something special, but they're not so close in of like, hey, that's their deal. It's like, hey, how can we be part of sharing this stuff? And, they're doing it well, and others were able to be blessed from it. But it was like, hey, let's share as much as we can.
Hey, Matt, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tim. No,
you.
Okay. I was thinking about, as Matt's sharing, I'm thinking about George Bell, right? And his cohort of geeks who would every year have to think as volunteers about how to go bigger and better with the technology, and how can we blow things up, and how can we use creativity to really create an experience that you just couldn't have when you're a little youth ministry of 20 or 25, right? And we'd always say to people, the goal is not to create this kind of experience if you're a youth ministry of 20, 25. Come and experience this, enjoy this together. Yeah. And we often would also talk about ramping into these experiences and ramping out of them, right? So that you didn't have this high that became something that was just unsustainable. But Matt, I was just thinking about all these volunteers who were released. It was a special season, because there were these volunteers who were released to live in their passion and to use what they were excited about to build the kingdom of God. And whether it was George and his crew of geeks, or I think of Tanya and the work that she did investing in our internship culture back then, and Kurt Erb investing in the pastoral leadership and making sure that we had depth and not just flash, right? And there were so many different personalities involved that helped us to really be the church. And when I think about leadership development, one of the things that I look back with great fondness on in those years was how so many young people discovered their passions. And in fact, you can see how they continue to live in those as they now minister as adults themselves. So yeah, Tim, sorry to cut you off, man. You're going to be deeper anyways. So
no, I'm not. But I love building off of one another in this, and I think still of you all in the room listening to this, and I wonder what it's like for you. But I want to say how proud I am of CBOQ over the years, because one thing first, we celebrate diversity, and I think back to the incredible women in leadership within this family. I think about Kathy McIntosh today, and sort of the cache of people that she has invested in over the years as the pastor, serving the staff of the retreat seasons. But I think of Eleanor Emmett, and I think of Tanya Cron, and how they've continued to keep this sort of light burning in the places where they lead as well. And I am thankful for the diversity that we've seen with some of the churches that represent different ethnic and cultural backgrounds that are deeply involved in the ongoing work, from the great leadership of the folks at St. Clair Avenue Baptist Church and their great youth ministry over the years. Just an incredible diversity that we've felt and seen within youth ministries being a part of it. And that that they had a place within this family is a beautiful thing. I think also, like, I want to brag a bit too on Darren and on Matt, and maybe even just sort of give a shout out to CBOQ as an organization about what's important as it relates to leadership. When I think about Darren didn't come to us as sort of a greenhorn in leadership. Darren, you had been a part of Willow Creek's leadership, the time that you had spent at Compass Point, Compass Point.
Yeah, Brant Bible Church back then, but
Brant. Yeah. And you came to us ready and willing to serve. I had served for 15 years in youth ministry down in the States, and then done some sort of para-church connections with building networks of youth leaders. And then Matt, of course, coming out of Spring Garden and the momentum that you felt into Meeting House, and then the infrastructure that you built with all those sites and site pastors. We placed a high level over the years in bringing people into this leadership role that can look at things at a macro level to ensure that at local levels things thrive. And I think that, one, for those of you who are hearing this today, wherever you are and whatever your roles are, that we invest in these kinds of people so that the local level can thrive. And we also know that sitting in that room, wherever you are, that one of you are equipped and ready to step in roles like this here. We hope we can keep you in the Baptist family. We lose too many people to other organizations, but we want you here to help us be better as we serve. But I love the diversity, and I love the commitment that CBOQ corporately has focused on bringing in people who've had infrastructure building experience as it relates to such an important ministry like Next Gen.
Yeah. And that's why you're such a great executive minister, eh? Didn't he just do that well, guys?
Got that right.
Yeah. Vote for Tim.
Yeah, right. Oh, man.
Sorry, Tim.
But
it's so true. And I think that's one of the strengths that we have of playing to the different seasons of over these years. When I look back and read over minutes and understand how do we get to where we are in CBOQ, when I first came in, I want to understand that. I mean, there was some pioneering work that had to be done by you, Darren, and there had to be major shifts that had to happen, that some that are looked, that are just easy, kind of low-hanging fruits. Let's deliver on this and you're going to look great. There's other tough conversations that leaders in the room, sometimes as we make shifts and navigate change, we're going through a change area right now through COVID-19. There's not going back to norm. We get to set a new norm. But the new norm sometimes is painful, sometimes is tough, and sometimes we have to make tougher decisions that in leadership you make because you see the bigger picture of where you're going. And Darren, I think you carved a lot of ground that sometimes was tougher to carve through. So some of us could then walk through to go to the next, to make the next level be able to, or next thing be able to make possible. And I just look back over there and go, you did instrumental laying some pioneering work that allowed denoms to look at what does it mean to be have a next gen or a youth ministry denominational role, and how do we do that, and what is the value that comes from that, and what are some of the tough calls as you move from a volunteer-based model to one that can be led with staff that has a voice, as Tim, you've shared at kind of the executive table there, that can shape the larger denom family to see the values. And that was instrumental. And I think as we see that shift of, Tim, what you've brought there of the importance of always relationships through it, the importance of people. And through this all, we're about people. It's what's happening on the front lines. I've often said that, there's no ministry larger than 5 in youth ministry. So we don't need to compare numbers, because it's really how do we pour well into people? How do you take that kind of corporate, whether you're a larger youth ministry, so you can pour into 5 coaches who pour into a couple of other leaders who pour into frontline students, or whether you're a youth pastor with 5 students that you're pouring into, or a couple of student leaders that are pouring out. We're pouring in intentionally. And Tim, when I look your era of really with CBOQ youth, being able to see leaders be developed because they were poured into intentionally to navigate and soften relationships, to build trust across not just with youth workers, but senior pastors, with associates, with board members, of going, hey, CBOQ youth has a key voice into shaping the larger CBOQ family, but it comes through building high trust and how you do that organizational management and support. And I think that was instrumental season of allowing CBOQ youth to become a key player in the ongoing shaping of where we're going to go as a family of churches, and how do we ensure that we do have the next generation voice and people being invested into and valued and shaped, and would see your seat now be able to see it come to a place where it's a strategic driver of who we are as a family of churches. And I looked at that and said that was one of the instrumental reasons for wanting to come and serve in this capacity, was to be led by an organizational leader that had a value of harmony, had a value of how do you invest into others, open up the door for others. And I felt like that's what, when I talk with people coming in and they're like, oh man, and director coming in, we want Tim, because Tim loves us. Who's this new person who's gonna, check us out? Because you knew their stories. I don't know if I can go to restaurants and the waitresses are like, yeah, that guy knows my kids' names because he's gonna make sure he's praying for them. Like, people and care about people and tracking that, and that set an anchor for who we are. Going, hey, the idea of tracking with people, they're not just a church name, they're not just a title of a position, but it's real people investing into the real lives of kids that are helping these youth move closer to Jesus. That you set the bar, that's able to build on our events, build on the value of leadership, take those elements, carry them forward, and say, let's make sure we also keep focus on people as we continue to then step into what do we create the next era to look like. And so, Tim, thanks for being that bridge between. I feel like a bridge between Darren and I, and saying how do we go forward. And in there, let me just also throw it, you guys can chat to this, Tim, a little bit. Like, there's not going to have here to Alvin there. In that 2010 year, there's that shift between I came in at 2011 that really stepped in and kept things healthy and making sure that we never lost sight of our mission, and really helped me, coached me a lot as I first came in that year of what are we all about? Where do we come from? And let's look where we're going. And that was a huge bridge here. I think it was really important. And Tim, how you stepped from executive ministry role to empower, equip, and release Alvin, and how he's able to really help me step in. I felt like I kind of had a firm footing, largely because I was able to have his wisdom kind of coach us in that season there.
You had his wisdom, but I was shocked when you early in as you're just chatting there, you talked about reading the minutes. And if you were able to understand Alvin's minute taking, like, that's really quite something outstanding, right? Because it's like 4C, 5C, colon, fish, First Peter, 4, and like, how do you understand that, right? But
you got to know hieroglyphs.
But emojis before they became popular, right? So.
That's right.
Actually, Tim, I just want to park on your era for a second there, because one of the things that you had touched on was looking at youth ministry from local churches with denominations. Also, during your time, there were times when you had a seat around with Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, with Baptist World Alliance. What were some of the shifts that you were starting to see later on in that decade of what youth ministry was being formed into, and how did that influence the way that you led into that season in the Director of Youth Ministry role?
Yeah, and I'll start corporately and then go locally, Alvin. I mean, there were certainly shifts happening, and I wasn't able to keep up with them. I really appreciated Darren's wave of leadership as youth ministry in North America was really taking a significant place on sort of the calendars and budgets of churches, and how Matt has driven us toward just the engagement. I'll talk about this in a minute about social media and the value around technology in youth ministry. For me, from a corporate perspective, I saw the shift go toward curriculum development. All of you have talked about it today. So there was this shift to providing a Canadian voice to the youth ministry experience in Ontario and Quebec. And of course, it was used a little more broadly than just here in Ontario and Quebec. But there was this shift that providing churches in a time where they couldn't access it online as easily as they can today, like Darren said, that they could get high quality stuff that had been beta tested in local churches and had been written by practitioners. I felt like that was critical to churches that were struggling. And I felt like it was awesome to come in and see that shift happen. I think the other thing that I saw is Darren had carefully developed a way for leaders to be developed to lead creatively and with excellence in their local context. But there was this sort of unseen confidence in being able to know that there was a watchful and careful eye of concern coming from CBOQ, that even though we were freeing people up and encouraging them to go back into their local communities and lead confidently and creatively, that there was still a place that they could run through a filter of, we think that'll work. And Darren had developed, coaches and people that could people who are experienced leaders who would breathe back into the life of some of those local churches. And I think, there were, even in our size churches, the average size church of a CBOQ church is 60 people. So many of the lead pastors were also the lead voice in youth ministry. And there was this great comfort, I think. I still find it today as I travel about the CBOQ. There's this great comfort to know that CBOQ has the back of those senior pastors who are trying to really create an investment into youth ministry. And so I think from a corporate perspective, that's the shifts that I saw. I think from a culture perspective, I saw this shift, the new opportunity. I think Facebook was launched in 2004 or something, and there was this new wave and opportunity that we were trying to know how to navigate as it came to youth ministry and social media, and the blessings of that, but also the challenges behind that. And I think that there was a shift happening then, and I was way behind on it. I was trying to get used to living in a new country and trying to understand, just how to talk to my, folks back home on email. And yet here Matt comes in with a social media presence, but also a social media understanding how to leverage that platform or those platforms to advantage youth ministries. And so I saw that shift culturally for us that was just unleashed, that, went from being a USB key with resources on it to come to our website to get these things. And yeah, I think that was powerful. And, I think back to the local church, just seeing this shift that churches felt like that they could make a significant investment in youth ministry. I think we began to use the languages of some of the Saddleback folks and Doug Fields about, you ought to have $1,000 per kid in your budget for your youth ministry. And that was a huge stretch. I mean, churches don't have that kind of money, but it made a statement that we believed that it was something worth investing in. And we felt like that it needed to sort of exhibit itself on the budgets of our church. And I think that was powerful. Lastly, and as critical as any of the things I've mentioned before, and Alvin, it has to do with you, is that not only did you provide great administrative structure for CBOQ youth, and not only did you provide a bridge for Matt when I left, and of course, what Darren is right in saying that you came up to speed quickly back in 2000 and was able to provide sort of the foundational pieces to these events and these opportunities for teaching. But Alvin, what we've been able to do is see a shift of the importance of administrative leadership in local churches. And you've led that. We've actually tooled you to coach and to resource churches. And I think it's having an impact beyond youth ministry. I think churches have shifted how they see their commitment and obligation to administrative care. It's grown and sort of seeped into the life of the entire church. And I think that is critical. Many times, we know that as a youth pastor, I failed on administrative things with permission forms and, the liability, legal things that we have to give attention to. And you've raised that awareness without scaring young leaders that they could be in trouble. You've given them the tools to be responsible, because teenagers and young adults and kids, they are the church of the present and the future, and we've got to care for them, and administrative things must be looked after. And that's a shift I'm so thankful happened. And I think you've been a model to other denominations across Canada about that. I don't know if I answered your question, Alvin. Man.
What was the question? It was really good though, Tim. Wow, I was fascinated by it.
I took notes.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
So shifting then a bit, because Matt, as you were alluding to a couple of minutes ago, as Tim was sensing this, God's move for him to step into the executive minister role, and there was this period where at least the director of youth ministry position was open. As you were starting to get a sense of where God was leading you back into this family, what were some opportunities that kind of struck out at you of why you might want to jump back into this?
Yeah, well, part of this, the journey back, coming back into this home tribe, was a unique one of really kind of seeing what God was doing at that time. Like I'll be honest here, like a denominational role doesn't really sound like a sexy role. And there's not a lot of like intrigue of like, wow, creativity and innovation and ability to bring change doesn't tie into when you think of a denominational role. And yet in my journaling and time with Lord, it was really clear that I only had a real piece of anything at the time of this role. And I look back on it, and part of it is I won't even know fully why I need to be pursuing this role until I was already in it. And Charity and I've walked through my journal on that, and just kind of a weird season of that. I'm going, keep God, what are you doing here? And I have a deep passion for the local church, a deep passion for leadership, a deep passion of how do we bring innovation and change, and how do we make sure that evangelism has been a key part of helping people and the next gen move forward. And there's something that also stuck out to me in a conversation with Duffy Robbins many years ago, as he said, I always tell my students, if the idea of writing a book, having a stage to speak from, being able to be a professor of youth ministry, says that's nothing to aspire to. Says the thing to aspire to is frontline work where you are dealing day to day with the life of a young person and helping them move closer to Jesus. If it happens that your skill set and what God calls you to do allows you to equip people in such a way that they can do this, then you better follow what God's calling and step into this. But this isn't something that you aspire to. It's something that you need to be led by God. But the reason that we do youth work is because of what happens on the front lines. And that really started with me. So the idea of stepping into this role felt a move away from front lines work, felt away from my passion of how do we deal right on the work in the front lines. At the same time, but had this piece of there's something to this. And I think as I stepped into it, I realized that this was an incredible tribe that has no power in the role of the denominational office. We really are a family of churches. We're not really a denomination in terms of a power from the center and a controlling. I think that's what really drew me, is going, hey, we really value, how do we invest into seeing men and women lead in their churches, see young people rise up. But we have to trust them that if what we have to offer is good, then it can be valuable. And if it really is not good, they don't have to use it. They don't have to access anything, come to any events. And I really love that there actually wasn't power. There wasn't a power and control position. It's actually a very humbling position to say, hey, how do I really commit to what it is to serve the local church? Because you have to really believe in what happens on the front lines to serve in this role. And so I think that's one of the things that excited me about stepping into this. It was part of the impact that people had on me of with Darren in there, Dan Malcolm early on along the way. The privilege of having sat with alongside Tim on the youth and young adult ministry roundtable with the EFC. And really, Tim was seen as kind of the pastor to Canada. His American come up, but all around that table, every one of those key leaders wanted to be pastored by Tim. To have that opportunity as a young leader, and the fact that CBOQ would take at the time a risk on a 31-year-old to step into, I felt like a denom role like this, and going, okay, if there's a trust there, and there's also the ability to be coached and mentored. I have such a high value on mentoring. But to know I could be mentored, I was looking at what is it to be invested into as I want to invest into others. And so to have that, I just felt really humbled that Tim would consider and the team would consider the opportunity to serve in this capacity and say, hey, how do we invest well into our volunteer and paid leaders so that they can be most effective on the front lines? And so I was looking at that going, here's the opportunity that CBOQ provides it's not a power position. Rather, it's a position that says we just want to serve, so that we can see more effective and health on frontline youth workers, resourcing them so that they can be most effective, and so that the ripple effect that can happen. And so felt, hey, there's some stuff I've learned along the way that I thought was worthwhile sharing, but really felt, hey, this was a family of churches that loved the local church, believed in leadership, but was also part of a wide enough spread that the diversity found in CBOQ was one that says, hey, we can really be part of thinking kingdom-wise. And it's less about how do we make, and I think it was one of the interviews, and I forget who was at the interview around the interview table that said this, but for me, it was the heart why I couldn't wait to work for CBOQ is they said, Matt, as we're going down this way, we're not interested in how do you help the Baptist church survive, but how does youth ministry and how does this role in your role help the kingdom of God move forward? And that's what excited me. It wasn't about how do you make a denom survive. It's about actually how do we be part of the kingdom growth. And I said, hey, like let's do this, let's run, let's fail together, and let's thrive together. Let's laugh together, let's cry together. But let's just see youth grow in their leadership and grow closer to Jesus.
I mean, over the last few years, right, things have kind of exploded now, where now this next generation team not only includes youth ministry, now we expanded children and family. We've also included camp as part of that. I guess, between Matt and Tim, how are some of these shifts now making, over the last 10 years, how is some of these shifts that we've made from our seats, how do you see it now playing out with the influence of the local church, of the front lines that people are having, or that people are involved in right now?
Tim, I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, thanks. So Alvin, I'm great at missing the point of a question, but I think what spawned in my mind as you were asking your question is, there have been times where people have said to me, I don't remember, I think it was 2.5 or 3 years ago, that Assembly was focused on the next generation. And many of our churches said, listen, that has been the most memorable assembly that I've been to, and I've been to 40, and I think I walked away. I think Matt, you and Alvin and the team led us through this journey, with backpacks on to sort of discover sort of the opportunities that the next generation offered us. And it wasn't just about ministering to, but ministering with, and ensuring a place at the leadership table. And I think that, again, it's just become part of the culture and DNA of CBOQ to that it's a part of the normal conversation that Next Generation Ministries, and that includes that whole umbrella you just talked about, Alvin, that is as significant as, the insurance on the building, or the salary for pastors, or, I just think that it's become just sort of part of the table talk for a church's life and ministry. And that is because we've created a language and an expectation from sort of the CBOQ headquarters is not the word we use often, but from our end. I think too, Alvin, we made the shift at Assembly even, and created a space for an actual delegate that is a young adult delegate. I mean, like the United Nations, we made that a priority, that not only could you bring the number of delegates that your church was eligible to bring, but we actually made space for you and made you feel required, obligated to bring a member of the next generation. And that wasn't just to teach them how to be grown-ups one day and be a big, a delegate, an adult delegate, but that they had the same rights and privileges and the same power and authority as their adult, friends from their church. And so I feel like that we've just continued to build a place for churches to be able to stand firmly on, we're going to do youth ministry because CBOQ says this is a priority. We made it a part of our 2015 to 2020 strategic priority, the next gen. And so I hope that sort of hints at what that is, but I feel like we've just made it significant.
I think we also came into a unique season at this time. 2012 was the release of the Hemorrhaging Faith research piece. And we've then also come into the renegotiating faith piece just in 2016 here. That 2012 year was an instrumental. I think that was a time through 2011, just as coming into here, that the roundtable really started to have the conversations that there were some different drivers that we had to look at that was really going to need to affect and prioritize ministry to the next gen. We saw the move towards, we still need age and stage, but the intergenerational elements coming together. And Tim, you were ahead of the curve on that one, that there was already a missional team in place for prioritizing children and family. And so as we stepped into this role, being able to move that from a missional team to an operationalized role, and then over the years going, hey, as we were seeing the landscape of Canada shift as it relates to our young people, that we said, there's an important thing that for the health of the church is going, what are those on-ramps? What are those neutral territories that are going to help young people, and in many ways be the generation that actually invites their parents back into the faith community, back into gathering together. And we saw the role and the importance of camp ministry, and recognizing the gift that it was that in 44, Kawasam was founded, that we had a relationship with Oneida, Hermosa, what was happening up at Norland, Burbank, that there was camps trying to say, how do we help these kids and others, and the importance of camping be an on-ramp to help the health of the church as they built those partnerships. And as we recognized that the landscape of Canada was so rapidly changing around that area, as we looked at young people and said, we have to make sure that all ages are cared for well and discipled well. That we'd say, how does the church look different now as we engage a boomer generation well, see them thrive and be mentors to a next generation. At the same way, seeing young people exit or asking the tough questions, or willing to say, I'm going to stop playing church because we really need to be the church. And so if you keep saying you want to respond to us, but things don't change, then they said, well, we'll just exit with our feet. Like if that's what's going to take. And I think we went through a period, and we're going through a period of waking up a little bit, of going, okay, now what does this look like? And we're going to prioritize how we invest into you. The discipleship is going to look differently. And we've, over the last couple of years, looking at more what was modeled to me, even when I was a youth, and then into this, the importance of mentoring. And we talked about how development of young leaders doing that. And now we're saying more and more now, how do we actually move away? And we love the program, the programmatic elements, the events models the events things are key. Those are kind of those altars of hey, these are the memorable moments. There are critical things that I can hang my story on, these key things along the way. We can't lose sight of those, and they're so critical. The compassionate experiences of being able to touch point and physically experience the work of God and the service and the way they will serve others. And yet we're finding that there may be a foundation rooted in mentoring, of sharing life together. And what does that look like, of having generations work together, that can't make every Wednesday night Bible study, but saying, hey, how do we have the church collectively investing into each other? But I think that a lot of that was spawned out of the hard work that's put together to launch that Hemorrhaging Faith piece that really was a shock, and yet also was like, we know this, but now we've got to respond to it. And so that was built on what we've seen in CBOQ, BCOQ over the years, and say, hey, how do we now bring this all together? Investment into kids and family, youth, camping, and really what we saw, the thread through all of that was retreats were powerful, missions trips were powerful, and through that was, do they have a mentor in their lives? And we said, okay, let's take this seriously, and how does that shape what we do now?
I'm curious, Darren. I mean, you've been out west now for over 10 years. And so in a lot of ways, you almost see like a time lapse of, from afar, how things have been developing and how things have been evolving. I'm curious, like, what have you noticed from where you are, of how all this is being shaped?
Yeah, I think something that CBOQ Youth has brought to the CBOQ over the years, and I'm just a small part of that, is it brought a credibility, right? So we've been talking about that on and off for the last while here as we've been chatting, but CBOQ Youth brought credibility when other denominations wanted to learn from us. I think that was a little bit of a wake-up call that said, really, us? I think that whether it was coming to our events to see how events were done, or learning from our curriculum, when we saw other denominations start signing up to come to Blizzard and Avalanche with their kids, because they said these are events where Jesus is going to be proclaimed, where evangelism is going to be core, and where we're going to help our kids to have a sense that it's okay to be a follower of Jesus. In fact, you can be proud to be a follower of Jesus and celebrate that with other young people from across the region, right? And the diversity of the young people, those early teams that we created. I know Matt has recreated and renamed the teams, probably with his team, and new jerseys that are way cooler than ours. But we had the ICE team that was focused really on inner city Toronto, and the diversity that came from all of the churches that were a part of that. We had the Moose team that was primarily made up of northern churches, and the diversity that comes from those small northern churches. And so when I look back and see it now, I'd say there's a credibility that I think surprised the CBOQ, but it's really been there all along, as we talked about, right? With people like Don Simmons paving the way early on, Dr. Dave Overholt on the team, Carl Nash's leadership. There's just been some tremendous thinkers and leaders that really paved the way. And then that's carried on. I think, Tim, you mentioned that the caliber of leaders that are available. And, we lead in big and small ways. People who have bigger platforms need to be different leaders than those who have smaller platforms. But leadership is required in every single one of them. I love, Matt, when you said, you don't lead in youth ministry more than 5, if you will, when you're on the front lines in terms of impacting, mentoring, and discipling young people. But then there need to be the folks who build the infrastructures. So, we had some really tough days. I think, Tim, you alluded to that, or Matt, you alluded to that. Some of the tough days, the conversations certainly with BLEC at Assembly those were difficult days, right? And some very hard conversations, and we had to walk through them. And my leadership was really forged in some of those times. And there's days that I still would choose not to be a part of when I look back at those times. And I think of some of the mentors of Mel Finley and Buff and Steve Cox, who just loved me through these difficult times and helped me to have new perspective. So yeah, when I look back now and look from a distance, I also want to be a little prophetic, Alvin, and say, let's not lose the focus on Jesus. Let's not become about the church. Let's become about Jesus. And the church is, of course, the bride of Christ. And Alvin, I think of, for so many years, you had that tagline, serving Christ by serving you. The focus and the goal is to serve Christ and see people grow in their love and knowledge of Jesus, and then be the kind of people who can share that love and that knowledge with others in their communities. And when we think of COVID-19 and the crisis that we're in right now, how important is it that the church be the church, that there be lights of Jesus lights all across our communities, loving their neighbors and caring for them and praying for them and encouraging them. And so I'd say that, yeah, that's from the distance. As I look over, I'm thrilled by the time that I spent at CBOQ Youth. It forged my leadership in so many ways. I felt like the handoff to Tim was just God ordained, right? Like Tim's pastoral leadership. Tim, it was so fun. Tim would come in and he'd be like, "I'm not an event guy," and you still say that, I know, but he just was able to continue to empower people who carried it forward. And now, Matt, when I look and see the tirelessness is probably a word that really describes you. And despite, your own personal health challenges, the tirelessness with which you have leaned in and expanded the focus and the work that you've done with Camp Quasend and inspiring and encouraging the other camps. I look at it, I'm so proud of CBOQ Youth. It's well beyond where I could have taken it. And you guys have given such great leadership. Alvin, anchored for 20 years, right? That's pretty amazing. And the consistency with which you're a spiritual leader as well as a administrative leader, and you're deeply theological. And I think that has really been the anchor that has kept us together. So I'm just really proud to be here today. I feel kind of like the grandpa, right? When you look and say, Tim and I think are fairly close in age, but it's been a long time since I've pulled out my CBOQ Youth jersey, and it smells a little musty, but boy, do I love those days. I've still right here behind my computer have that plaque that we used to give out right at the 5-year mark. It shows a picture of the boathouse. And of course, we show the boathouse from Muskoka Woods, and shout out to John McCulley and the way in which he's helped us to build BCOQ Youth over the years. But that boathouse and the special moments that took place there on Thursday nights, I think it still does, right? A time of consecration when young people are empowered and given their jerseys in the jersey ceremony and knighted to be these leaders that are going to make a difference in the lives of their peers and and maybe those who are just a bit younger than them. Special memories that I look back on. I'm not sure I answered your question, but it was fun to chat for a bit.
Love it.
I am curious, like, obviously you've, one of the emphasis that each of you have brought is this idea that it's not just about this idea of a Baptist family, right? It's about God's kingdom moving forward. Just kind of really quickly, what are some key partners that have been influential during your moments as director?
I think if it goes, go ahead, Tim. No, you first.
I'll go first. I'm going first this time.
Yes, you are.
Alvin, I mean, that is the best question that only you would ask. I really appreciate that, because that is what this is all about. It's the people that kind of walk beside us, hold our arms up at times, and then people that we turn around and hold their arms up at different times. And I mean, key partners for me was Darren. Darren was still close by for me. And I think that was really incredible that I could walk down the hallway and ask a question. And he sort of empowered me to think about that on my own and a little differently than he might, and reminded me that this was mine now to deal with, and I think that was so great. I do feel like Ken Bellows, who's our executive minister at the time, he did not micromanage, and he empowered us to do what we did. So significant partner there. And then, Dave Overholt comes to mind as it relates to an individual whose life exhibited everything that we hope to accomplish in youth ministry. And then of course there were a few sort of significant churches that they were so on board with us because what it was doing for them, that they were extra supportive of us at CBOQ. And there are too many to name, but there were a good number of local churches that were bought into this and were the champions on the assembly floor, and were the champions in the giving column to CBOQ and the CBOQ youth. So I would say that it's always been wonderful to partner with Youth Unlimited, with sort of the growing network of Canadian Baptist youth workers across the country, great partners of ours, and then sort of the larger youth ministry family that was sort of built through the EFC Youth and Young Adult Roundtable. And so I think I would identify those as partners. There are others. I know Matt and Darren and Alvin, even know more.
Yeah. I was going to just start, things sequentially. And those early days when we were partnering with Muskoka Woods and saying, hey, would you give us space in the calendar for us to host these events? And CBOQ Youth, again, wasn't well known in those days, right? And so for them to then give us some key weekends that, everybody wanted that weekend was significant. And the leadership that John McCauley and Tim Duffield and others, Alan Duffield there, have provided over the years has been significant, right? In the way in which we've been able to partner together. I think of the impact of Tyndale and the provision of youth ministry there. We've all had opportunity, I think, to be involved in speaking or teaching at Tyndale over the years, and the impact that we've been able to enjoy as Tyndale has developed and built youth leaders. I think that's significant. Arrow leadership and the investment of Arrow leadership in the lives of so many pastors in the CBOQ, youth leaders. And when you think back over kind of some of those grandparents in youth ministry, they were all impacted by Arrow leadership and by Carson Pugh's leadership and mentoring. And I think that's really significant. Certainly me personally, I was impacted by two godly men who are part of the Willow Creek Association. So Dan Webster and Bo Bashirs, both of them came and speak at our events. They mentored me, they encouraged me, they made sure that we were staying true to Jesus and on track. And I think that those were very important people. Certainly our connection with Matt and the Meeting House and some of the things that Matt was already beginning to think of back in those early days was really important. And so I think that, when you look back over it, we were doing stuff across Canada. We were sharing interns from Atlantic and Western Canada and learning from one another, speaking at each other's events. Those were really significant days. So we certainly don't exist in a bubble. And when I think of the way in which the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada has supported BCOQ youth, the way in which some of the various alliances and affiliations have helped us, they've been substantial, and they're good days, right? And it's fun when you get together with them and you can reminisce, but you can also think about, hey, what does it look like for us to move forward? And I love that CBOQ Youth has moved forward. So as Matt's kept maybe the old 90s logo, which would have actually almost, I think, been I guess it was a 90s logo, not an 80s logo, but so much else has changed appropriately, right? And you haven't held on to things that shouldn't have been held on to too long. But we've remained true to the idea that Jesus is central in all of this.
Yeah, and I think we think of those partnerships. I think those ones that have often got started early, those Arrow partnerships there, and I think of the Arrow continuous support, and Steve Brown obviously has got a warm heart for us, and just being able to lean into that connection, both from his seat when he was here with us and continues on to this day. We're grateful for a lot of stuff that's happening with Alpha, with Tim Teakle, and that partnership with you is just a high value on how do we continue to reach out and what they're doing and say, let's stay close. For all of us, I think has been the CB Youth team as well. That's been kind of connecting early on the directors of youth together, and then adding associates and other roles. But being able to be partners as Canadian Baptist leaders on the youth front, kind of across the country, and learning and serving with each other, that out of that would come stuff. What we have is the Imagine of Hope resource. That was really just so instrumental in shaping a number of our churches and how we're responding to the challenges and the obstacles and the opportunities that were being provided. But that was a collective work that we're grateful for the partnerships that came in through that as well to make that forum possible. So yeah, look at that. I mean, people along the way, I think on the early start of BCOQ Youth, in there was Alana Walker on the committee. When I was first in here, one of the first people to meet with and encourage me in this role was Alana, and continues on as a support. So you have those streams of partnerships of Don Simmons, of still at this point, still from time connect in with Dan Malcolm, and you think of the early stuff of what he was wanting to see in this, and putting together that committee to make sure that this gets struck up. You think of those that are that saw that, hey, let's take the risk and try to operationalize this. And now to this day, many of those from that place continue to say, hey, how do we continue to keep this as a priority and a value in the family of CBOQ? I think that when we talk partnership too, it's crazy that there's a high trust of like Maple Leaf Sports. They're a partner in this, but they look at our events and what was said at the caliber. I mean, Alvin shares this. What happens at a center court is so widely respected. They use this to share at their gatherings with other different arenas when they get together. How do you do a post-game experience that we're trusted in the excellence that's been brought and that was been modeled? And so it's neat that we can have a partnership outside of faith organization that says, hey, this is an organization and a people group that we want to trust. And I think we've done honored the name of God and that by being able to partner in with, and over the years, we had partnered in with the Thai Cats. And so when you have different things like that, where they say, hey, we want to trust you. It's neat how those partnerships have allowed us to do what we do, that we're not, it's not about how do we tighten the reins in and just be insular, but really.
Oh, did you just freeze? Or did I just freeze?
Oh, I think we lost Matt.
Yeah.
The cost of
there's a screenshot right there.
Yeah,
it's tough to get good internet in Burlington.
Oh man.
He used his allotted time. It cut him off.
That's right. Somebody tripped over the modem wire out to the minivan. That's right. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's been interesting, like, even the last few years, as recognizing, because we can't do all this by ourselves, right? I mean, I think of some of the more recent partnerships we've had with, InterVarsity, Power to Change, as Pastor for Christ, Navigators, right? And just the ways that we are, it's interesting even to see how collaboration is moving into these different areas, right? Canadian Youth Network, with Dale and such, right? I think there's definitely been, it's been neat to see that there isn't this territorialism, but rather this is idea of, we've got this focus to want to see, we want to see people meet Jesus in whatever way they can, and how do we help do that, right? And there's been there's been a building of trust in that. That's been, that I've always been blown away by how we actually do this together. So we got Matt back now, I guess.
Sorry about that. This is a little bit of the challenge of working in COVID-19. My home office is a minivan on my driveway, receiving the Wi-Fi signal from my house, and so that my kids can still be able to be kids and have their own schooling and everything inside, and so that we can actually chat without kids running around. So,
a minivan. Wow.
Hey, Alvin, I know I don't want the last word, but I'll say this so that I don't have it. But
Really, Tim?
Here we are. I have two. I had two things to say. I've now forgotten one, so let me say one of them. In this pause with COVID-19, for years we've been saying the youth in your church are not the church of tomorrow; they're the church of the day. Matt, you keep saying let them lead. I mean, we've all said it in different words or the same, but we keep saying let them lead. And I got to be honest. I believe if we took a snapshot of some of the insides of these sanctuaries on Sunday mornings that has 2 or 3 people in them trying to pull off a live service, if you took a snapshot backwards at the people who are leading at the technology table, or even just shift over from the pulpit to see who's leading worship, it is this next generation. And I wonder, we all believe in the providence of God and how God makes his way in our world. And I believe that God has now sort of open the door for the youth to lead. If we weren't doing it quick enough or well enough, that it's happening. And man, I am so grateful. And the conversations, I was on a pastor's prayer time the other day with about 51 pastors, and there were 4 or 5 comments about, I had my grandson in, or, we had the youth group in that helped us know how to do Facebook Live. And I just thought, of course. And so this shift is happening because it has to at this moment. And so I'm really thankful for what this is allowing the church to do. We're never going back to what we did before COVID-19. The new normal is going to be very different. And I hope it is, because I think it's going to open the door for some people that weren't given the chance to lead who are adults, and many students who had not been given the chance to lead who are capable of leading at a very high level, an excellent level. And I love this. And I remember the other thing. I tell you, I have been so moved, no matter what I hear out and about great resources and excellent events, and the ability to know that you're going to get the latest information from CBOQ Youth about trends and challenges and requirements as it relates to compliance with the law. All of those things are important for our churches. I continue to get this comment about everything is so Jesus focused, and we take seriously biblical theological thoughtfulness as it relates to what we do with the next generation, from children and their parents all the way up to young adults in this specific category of ministry. But everything, I know that Darren DeGraaf's heart beats for people to know Christ. And I know that everything that Matt is trying to create and creating at Quasand, and with the events with today's teens, and also with all the stuff, Alvin, that you're working on and coaching leaders, everything is about students coming to know Christ. And I am so thankful that that has never been shifted, even slightly, a degree off of our main sort of true north for this organization and this group, CBOQ Youth. And I think it's paying off exponentially in the number of people who are finding their way toward Christ. And I love that about CBOQ Youth.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
So let me just wrap up with this then. I know that I've taken quite a bit of your time, and I appreciate you guys making time for this. As you've alluded to, I've gone through, I'm on my 3rd director. I don't know if that's just a trend or.
Who was your favorite, Alvin? Like, maybe just let's turn the table. I mean, any of these guys, your favorite director, you're welcome to share.
Yeah. Sure. Honestly, Alvin.
Just like which is my children's my favorite, right?
Right.
Have one.
There you go. No, I mean, I think about my time over the last 20 years, and I think, each of you have definitely shown me have definitely shaped different parts of who I am, right? I mean, Darren, I think when you first brought me on, and we started initially dreaming what this thing could look like, one of the things I kept on saying to people, especially near the beginning of my time here, was, you basically crunched about 5 or 7 years worth of leadership development into 2 years easily, right? And just accelerated just my understanding of this idea of vision and mission and strategy and such, right? I think, and just how you were laying that out, I got a very front row view of what does that look like, and how does that all go together. And so that's definitely shaped a deep part of me. Tim, I think back to, I think one of the first times we sat at Tucker's Marketplace, and I think Darren was mentioning this earlier. The waitress is now talking with you for 20 minutes. Right? I'm sitting there going, how does he know all, just walk? And I think that the idea that it's not just the role, it's not just people, but the person is important. And I've tried to take that to heart, right? In terms of knowing the individual, and not just knowing the individual's name, but the story behind it, right? And the way that you're able to, you've shared some tips and tricks on how you do that. And that's been helpful even for me to, as a task guy, right? To, how do I help then to actually know a person through those ways? I think that's been deeply influential. I think, Matt, one of the things that I've always appreciated is, some people, they talk about seeing, having vision at, a 30,000 foot level or whatnot. And my comment is, Matt sees the stratosphere. He sees things way beyond where that is, right? And what's hit me is both your ability to see not just that level, but also the micro details. And I think it's the way you're wired, right? You can basically bounce from the stratosphere right down to the ground and back up again, and be able to notice all those things. And not just that, but how fast you notice them, and how you process them, and how it actually makes sense out of all that. It's not just, and I think, I look at that and recognizing, it's both, it is a both and, right? It's knowing where you're going long-term, but then also how do all the little details fall into place in order to get to that in order to get to that destination. I've been, I think all three of you have deeply influenced in who God has shaped me to be, and I'm grateful for our time together.
Nicely played, Alvin. Nicely played. But I think you gave Matt the most time, so I'm thinking Matt's your favorite. Yeah.
I think it's proportional to the numbers of years you guys had served. So. There you
go. I see. Tim, I feel like I'm not with you, man. Yeah, we need to.
Hey, so the other side.
There you go.
Oh, you got yours.
Be backwards.
Yeah, I got yours. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, mine's forwards. There we go.
Yeah, maybe I'll Photoshop mine in later. There you go.
Yeah. I feel like I should wear my old musty jersey.
You guys are awesome.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your time, and I think definitely it's been an honor to see what God's been doing through this thing that we call CBOQ Youth the last 20 years. It'll also be interesting to see where God takes us, especially whatever the new normal looks like in the coming months or even years later on, right? Whoever the next director or next associate looks at the minutes on this one, it'll be interesting to see what the story that God's been telling through this. But I'm grateful that you each have had a part in this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Alvin.
Thanks, Alvin.
Yeah,
It was great to meet you guys.